Hello, friends. Although I can't see you waving, I'm imagining you waving hello back. I'm sure some of you are. So good morning if it's morning where you are. Good afternoon or evening if you're in one of those time zones or times of day. Just always, I think many of you have the chat box open and you can see, people responding. But just a little encouragement, if you've not found the chat box or opened it yet, just in the bottom right corner, there's a little speech bubble with a little arrow on it. You can just click on that and see the Sangha joining, arriving, and this lovely shared connection. And way back when all of this online practice first started, if you can cast your mind back to that time, tricky time, I think many of us weren't quite sure how it would work, if online meditation, online Sangha could work, and if we could create connection, create Sangha through, the airwaves. And my sense is the answer is a resounding yes. We can and we have, and just wonderful to be able to reach and connect out to people across the globe. So I'm sharing a lot of appreciation and gratitude to all of you present here live, and all of you who may be doing the recording at a later date. So welcome, friends. So we're moving through the week with this, as I mentioned, somewhat challenging, slightly tricky topic of the hindrances or the obstacles. And as I mentioned yesterday, it's just one way of working. It's one tool of many that we might practice with for a little bit, explore, see if it is revealing or insightful. We can continue with it or we can let it go. But with a little faith in the knowledge that having explored and been curious in this way this week, it's always going to make a positive impact on your practice going forwards. Because somewhere in your nervous system, somewhere in your being, you've encountered and become a little bit familiar with these things. So as always, I'm keen not to over-labor the point, but I will paste the little link for donations if you can share appreciation in that way, and to help support our community going forwards, to make sure Sangha Live continues to thrive and continues to function, offer teachings from different teachers that might help you, or really importantly, might help other people on their path. So again, I'll talk a little bit before our sit, before we get to the good stuff, as it were. And I thought it might be useful just to kind of have a little recap of some of the things we've explored. And so far we've kind of grappled a little bit with sensual desire, with aversion or ill will, as it's sometimes translated. Yesterday, a little bit with sleepiness or haziness, or that kind of low energy. But also sometimes when there's that agitation or restless type of energy, which will bring us in a little bit to doubt, which is kind of always present to some degree, when working with the other four. But yesterday I offered just two possible ways of engaging or working with the hindrances in your practice. So as a little refresh, the first was this: to be in your practice, finding an object for your meditation. That could be the breath, it could be sound, it could be physical sensations in the body. Maybe it's more open awareness, kind of an open object. And then establish a little presence, attention, concentration to that. And then when you notice an obstacle or hindrance arising, gently label it in a simple way and return back to the focus of your practice. And we repeat that over and over again. I think this technique is quite useful if we have a tendency to spin out into thought or narrative or story around, oh, is this hindrance? Is it that hindrance? What does that mean? How do I work with it? Am I a bad meditator? Simply label and acknowledge, and then return to what our object of meditation is. So that's the first way. The second way is, particularly sometimes these obstacles are really persistent or insistent. They're very much there. In those instances, sometimes it can be useful to kind of really go in and use the hindrance itself as the object of your meditation, and feeling how that is experienced in your body. Maybe the kind of thoughts that get attached to that, the emotions or memories, sometimes images that get attached to that. So really becoming familiar with this experience, and more importantly, I think, staying with it a little bit, learning to gently, calmly stay with whatever is arising. But this does raise a question, and a question that I got in a private message around, okay, yes, we can cultivate curiosity, we can cultivate compassion, but what does that look like practically? How do I do that? So if you're wondering, curiosity might be, for an example, I recognize agitation and restlessness at present. Okay. I'm going to feel it in my body. You can feel there's a hardness or a tension in my belly. There's a warm, bubbling feeling around my chest. My shoulders are tense. Great. That's you investigating and being curious. But we continue to be curious by perhaps asking, how is that sensation changing? Sometimes the physical experience can feel really solid, really stuck. But everything is always changing or shifting in small or subtle ways. So it might be staying with that sense of the bubbling in the chest. Is it spreading? Is it changing? Moment to moment, gently being with it. What we often find is things are always changing, right? Nothing is stable, nothing is fixed. Sooner or later it will shift. And that can be really freeing, I think, in the practice. That these difficult experiences may hang around, but they're always in a state of change, impermanence. One of my favorite Pali words, anicca, often translated as impermanence, or the impermanent nature of all things. And then compassion. How do we offer ourselves compassion? In the heart practices, what we call the Brahma Viharas, the abodes of the heart, one very practical way is to offer ourselves phrases of kindness or friendliness. I'm sure many of you know this and have practiced this. They can be simple phrases of your own choosing. Typically, they can be things like, may I be safe, may I be healthy, may I be happy, may I be at ease. So that's one sort of quite practical, tangible way. Also, for some people, what can really help is this sense of an inner smile. You might not be in the best mood, that's okay. Just a sense of a very gentle, soft inner smile. It's the physical feeling of that, very subtle, kind of Mona Lisa, maybe. So that sometimes can help connect to that feeling of kindness or friendliness. And we can cultivate that feeling in the heart or in the body. So I hope that little recap is helpful. We also yesterday looked at, if you're feeling very sleepy, tips for that. You can lift the chin, lift the chest if you're sitting. And if you're really sleepy, opening the eyes, looking up, maybe even changing posture. And on the flip side, if you're feeling very restless and agitated, you can, just for a short period, you could lengthen the exhale. Or you could take that sighing practice we tried, the physiological sigh, Let's do that together now. It's a nice way to ground and settle. So on your next inhale, breathing in through the nose, all the way up to the top. Take a little pause and sniff in a bit more air. And then sigh out of your mouth. If that felt good to you today, feel free to take another one. But within all of this, as I mentioned, one of the most challenging things we come up against is doubt. Doubt, the fifth and final obstacle in this set of 5. And it's a tricky one, right? It permeates so much of our actions, so much of our life, kind of self-doubt, doubting our ability, doubting if we're doing things right, doubting what we should be focusing on. And as I said, in the suttas, in the traditional texts, there are remedies and antidotes to all of these hindrances. And the antidote that's often offered for doubt is faith. And it's not so much a blind faith, but a faith in perhaps something bigger than yourself. So this could be faith that there are other meditators out there who have walked this path and are walking this path and have found comfort and solace and helpfulness in this practice. I think one of the greatest supports for faith and belief in these practices is the Sangha itself. It's all of you wonderful people being here together. That many of you return to these Sangha Live courses. Many of you return to the practice regularly, because we sense there's a fundamental goodness to it. And the sense of trusting in the goodness of your practice. Martin Aylward, who many of you know from Sangha Live, used this phrase a lot when I first met him. Trust in the goodness of your practice, that you wouldn't be here if there wasn't some seed of faith, some seed of belief that it might be helpful. So we can draw close to that. And as you all know, I love stories, and many of you will know one of the most popular stories of Buddha, the night of his enlightenment, where he encountered the demon god Mara. So I'll share that story because it would be appropriate. And so briefly, the story goes that after many years of exploration, of practice, of seeking, one day the Buddha resolved to sit down beneath this beautiful tree, the Bodhi tree, and made a resolve to sit all night, that he would reach enlightenment, be fully attained and enlightened. He made this strong determination to sit and to stay, no matter what. And so the story goes, as he sat there under the beautiful branches of this Bodhi tree, its great trunk, this amazing gnarled trunk, he sat in meditation, and the demon god Mara came to him. And the Mara had a question. Who do you think you are? What right do you think you have to enlightenment? And Mara tried all sorts of tricks, and many of them relate to the hindrances. So the story goes that he tried to tempt the Buddha away from practice by sending his beautiful daughters to seduce him. But the Buddha sat firm in his resolve, in his belief that he had a right to enlightenment. Then Mara sent armies of monsters to scare, to make him afraid, so that he would leave his practice. But the Buddha stayed strong. And after Mara had tried all these different things, many of you know this story, he tried all these different things. His final trump card, the ultimate, was doubt. And Mara said to Buddha, who do you think you are? You have no right. You have no right to enlightenment, to peace, to spaciousness. You have no right to the end of suffering. Who will you call upon Who will you call upon to justify and prove your right? So the story goes, Buddha reached out his right hand and placed it on the earth and called upon the earth goddess. And the earth goddess responded, in the right to be here. You have a right to be here. You have a right to this. And like that, Mara vanished. But I think for me, one interpretation of this story is in those moments of doubt, reaching out and calling upon something which is greater than yourself, something bigger. And that can simply be our community here, other people in the practice. As some of you know, my history is bound up with addiction, and within certain programs like 12-step programs, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, the first step is to admit our challenges and to call upon a higher power. We're invited to call upon a higher power. And for some people, that's God. That's easy. For some people, it's simply the community of people working to a similar goal, having similar aspirations, a similar life story, similar challenges. Then for others, it's simply calling upon nature, Mother Earth herself, as the Buddha did, something greater than you that you can trust and put faith in. And both faith and wisdom are needed on the path towards enlightenment or towards spaciousness and presence. So I think I've probably talked enough on that point. I think we will practice. And in the practice today, we'll really focus on breath. If there's a meditation object which is more familiar or that you prefer, by all means, use that. But we'll stay gently with the breath. Hindrances may arise. We'll acknowledge them and we'll return. And doubt quite often will arise. And we're going to be on the lookout for that one today. So, settling into a posture of your choice that feels helpful, feels skillful. Balance of being comfortable, settled, but awake, alert. We'll begin with the sound of the bell, friends. So you may settle into a sense of familiarity with your posture. Here again. Here we are. Just like this. You can sense into posture in a very general way. Points of contact with the ground, or cushion, or chair. And perhaps sensing into the beautiful length of your spine. Awake, bright, here. And if there are external sounds that are initially distracting, you might be a little curious to them at first. Just let your attention follow them. But then returning to the sense of body, space around the body, settling like waves into small ripples, and eventually the calm, clear surface of a lake. And you may recall in the first day the story of Buddha's pond, sitting quietly, calmly by the pool, just to spend a little time becoming familiar with your reflection. And within that, you may begin to sense the breath. And allowing awareness to establish itself on the rhythm of your breathing. Allow awareness to establish itself upon the rhythm of your breathing. And we'll stay with this object of attention, the breath, returning to it whenever we remember to, whenever we realize we've wandered off. And an invitation perhaps to sense if any of the hindrances are making a friendly appearance right now. You could choose to notice, to label, and return to the breath. Or you might choose to investigate, be curious to the experience in your body. We'll practice this way for a little while. If you're noticing there is doubt arising, uncertainty if you're doing it right, if you're getting anywhere, you might sense into our Sangha. Right now, 120 people around the world sitting together with you. Take heart and take strength from their practice, our practice together. And for the remaining time, you might begin to sense if any of these obstacles are absent, if any of the hindrances are absent, and really knowing that experience. These last few minutes, as always, I'll share a poem. I'll read it twice. This poem is by the wonderful late Mary Oliver, and it's called I Worried. I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the rivers flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? And if not, how shall I correct it? Was I right? Was I wrong? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it, and I am, well, hopeless. Is my eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to get rheumatism, lockjaw, dementia? Finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing, and I gave it up. And I took my old body and went out into the morning and sang. I worried a lot. Will the garden grow? Will the rivers flow in the right direction? Will the earth turn as it was taught? And if not, how shall I correct it? Was I right? Was I wrong? Will I be forgiven? Can I do better? Will I ever be able to sing? Even the sparrows can do it, and I am, well, hopeless. Is my eyesight fading, or am I just imagining it? Am I going to get rheumatism or lockjaw or dementia? And finally, I saw that worrying had come to nothing and gave it up and took my old body and went out into the morning and I sang. And so just giving yourself a moment to enter a new type of presence, perhaps, with this community. So, doubt can be really present in the practice, can be tricky. And I can see a question that's come up, which is quite pertinent. I'm going to come to that question in a moment, Lizzie, because it ties into something that might be helpful as well for me to share. But this sense of sitting together, this community, and even when this course or future courses end on Sangha Live, the sense that if you're sitting in your own practice, somewhere out there in the world, somebody else will be meditating at the same time as you. Pretty much any time you sit, there are monks and nuns and monastics deep in forests, monasteries, caves, all over the world, all with their firm faith and belief that these practices can really help ease and end suffering for ourselves and for all beings. So whenever you practice, there is someone out there practicing with you, for sure. And I'll share a brief personal story which might tie into the question, but please feel free to write other questions and comments. Doubt is something in my own life and practice I've worked with a lot. When I was first practicing, particularly in the swirl and the chaos of addiction, which I came into the practice with, doubts about ever being able to stop those behaviors, about ever being able to get sober or to stop self-destructive cycles. There's huge amounts of doubt. The physical challenge of sitting with kind of intensity of craving, addiction. And it took me to my first silent retreat under S.N. Goenka, a lineage teacher some of you will be familiar with. And I was fully prepared. I was going to go on this 10-day silent retreat. It was the first one. And I was ready for anything. I was ready to encounter traumatic memories from my past, physical pain and discomfort from sitting. I was ready to encounter boredom, the feeling of withdrawal symptoms from the substances that were in my body, all of these things. And I went with this fire that I could do it. And as those days went on, I became more and more frustrated, and it became more and more challenging rather than more and more peaceful. And it got worse and worse and worse as the days went on. I wasn't sure if what I was feeling was real. I wasn't sure if I was practicing correctly, if I was doing it right. I found it very difficult to trust whether there was any point in it at all. And a lot of the time I just thought I should have gone on holiday instead, and I could be on a beach. If any of you had that experience on a deep retreat, like, oh, why am I putting myself through this? And this went on and on and on towards the final sit, just before the silence was lifted. And I got more and more frustrated, and it was a loving kindness, a metta practice. And I was just so full of shame and so full of hate towards myself that the invitation to practice compassion caused this huge amount of rage and frustration to fill me up. And the silence ended and the meditation ended, and I ran. I got up and I ran out of the hall. I ran through the fields, I ran into the forest, and I stood at the edge of this forest at a fence, the kind of morning mist over the landscape, and I wept. I cried my eyes out. What a waste of time. What was the point? And quite magically, this bird, a pheasant, came and landed in the mist just in front of me, very close. And I looked directly into its eyes, and it kind of looked at me like this. And something in that connection, the penny dropped. And I realized this whole experience for me was about meeting doubt and shame. The whole experience was coming to terms with the way in which I doubted myself, doubted my ability, how much I needed the validation, the speaking, the input of others to let me know that I was right and I was okay and I was doing things well. And when that penny dropped in that moment, bam, bliss, ecstasy, joy. And I continued to cry for quite a while. But there was a huge amount of joy that came through that realization at the end of that very, very long, difficult period, many hours of working with it. And there are those breakthrough moments, and we can take faith or take hope that those breakthrough moments can occur in our practice over time. And I'm sure many of you have had those, and they can be wonderful. We experience them, we return to the practice, and we're right back with all the stuff. So this question from Lizzie, perhaps you could say something about shame and perhaps its relation to doubt. And thanks so much, James. I'm singing lovely, wonderful Mary Oliver, right? So shame, there's so many different expressions of it. It's been a particular thing for me in my life and practice, shame. And shame, as any other experience, has a lot of physical feelings in the body associated with it. Practice can teach us and help reassure us that we can start to stay and be with those feelings a little bit more. But sometimes those feelings are too strong, right? Sometimes the feeling of shame is so overwhelming, like a shame spiral, that it's impossible to be with what's happening within the physical body. So when an experience is very, very strong, particularly experiences around addiction, around shame, around doubt, often our strongest desire, I believe, is to withdraw. to shut off, to isolate. What I've learned over the years and have been taught and believed to be true is that both addiction and shame are maladies of disconnection, that often they stem from experiences where we were othered or separated or disconnected from others. And often the response is to try and protect ourselves by shutting off, closing down, not speaking to anybody. That might be your experience. And the hardest thing in the world to do in those moments is to reach out for connection, for community, to a friend, for support. But very, very often, if it's a person that you can trust, it's a person that you can trust, the Buddha trusted in the earth goddess. If there's one person that you can trust, that you can go to in those moments, as horrible a feeling as it is to have to reach out, as awful as that is, very, very often it can help soften a little and soothe the feeling of shame or the feeling of doubt, that feeling of disconnect. And so many of these challenges that we work through emotionally in life are born from a place of disconnection and separation. Practice, of course, can help us find more connection within to ourselves. But this is why community and Sangha is so important. Because without the community, without the support of others or one person that you can turn to, it's very difficult to engage with these difficult emotions and to process them. And if there isn't one specific person that you feel you can turn to, that's also possible, that's also okay. Then communities like this, even just the little comments in the chat box, reach out, write a comment, say hello. Even just that small little gesture, just to say hello in a group like this, doesn't have to be anything more than that, can just give a tiny little bit of soothing to an experience of shame or doubt. But it's a huge topic and a lifetime's work for many of us, right? Yeah. And we still get triggered. I still sometimes get shame triggered. Very rarely these days, but it's still there. But I have faith that I have this wonderful history of practice. I have these wonderful tools, the teachings that I love so much, the communities like you all that I love so much. And I know when something hard happens, I can rely on that higher power. Yeah. So very lovely to see comments. I hope that was helpful in some way, Lizzie, or interesting at least. And yeah, thank you, Steph and Maria. Thank you, Heidi, Joss, and Britta. Lovely reflection. I took my old body out in the morning and I sang. That sentence woke me up and made me feel connected. Thank you. Thank Mary Oliver. I very much believe in the power of poetry, different ways we can connect. Maybe for you it's art, maybe it's music. To one of the earlier comments in the week, are we supposed to remove all sense desire and sense pleasure? And I would say absolutely not. Enjoy art, enjoy music, enjoy friendship, enjoy poetry, enjoy life that's here. But knowing all of it is changing, all of it is dissolving. It's kind of everything is crumbling in a way, impermanence in nature. But perhaps the preciousness and the beauty of all those things is in their impermanence, right? The fact that things fade makes them precious because they don't last. So again, nice to see you here, Alice, and great to have you here as well, Tida. And wonderful to see Victoria acknowledging Britta and Alina. We have a few minutes left if there are any other questions and observations. I will just paste the title of the poem in the chat box. And again, just a soft, gentle reminder, we will, George will be sharing them at the end of the week. So here's this one. It's called I Worried by Mary Oliver. What I love so much about Mary Oliver is she was a nature poet first and foremost, but she had this incredible simplicity, the simplicity of her language, but a simplicity which evokes something so deep and so rich. And I think there's something of the practice in there for me as well. Simply sitting, being with breath, simple and profound. Thank you, deep bows, Monica. So, thank you, Connie, Layla, Natalie. I can see Mr. Selly Sturrock. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Mr. Selly Sturrock. These Mary Oliver words sometimes useful. I go down to the shore in the morning, and depending on the hour, the waves are rolling in and moving out. And I say, oh, I am miserable. What should I do? And the sea says in its lovely voice, excuse me, I have work to do. Oh, I've never read that before. Thank you so much for sharing. That's definitely making it into my little scrapbook of favorite poems. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, the sea has work to do. Nature moves forwards. So tomorrow, friends, we'll put all of this together. And I've spoken probably less about contemporary perspectives on habits, as we've really got stuck into these hindrances. We've rolled our sleeves up, right? But tomorrow I will offer a little more dialogue on kind of practical contemporary techniques for working with habits. And what I find really joyful is that many of them correlate and fit in really nicely with these Buddhist teachings, actually. So tomorrow I'll share a couple of techniques that are quite helpful for reinforcing habits, helping you believe that you can do these things, you can change or establish habits. But always, the practice first and foremost, cultivating mindful, compassionate awareness and presence is the ground, is the foundation from which all helpful change can occur. So, seeing last comments of thanks coming in, and thank all of you for supporting each other, all these people together in the Sangha practicing together. The loving kindness and the strength of your practice is felt by all, I'm sure. So thank you, everybody. Wishing you a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you tomorrow.